Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Samson narrative, Judges chapters 13 through 16, in our continuing study of the book of Judges. Judges 13:1. Now the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, so that the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. Now the Philistines, as far as we can tell, came from the area of the Aegean and had established a colony in southwestern Canaan. Let's zoom in on that. Here's Canaan. The Philistines had established along the southern part of the coast of Canaan. In fact, we have records of them where there are what look like Philistine tribes who attempted to invade Egypt. Now they're depicted not in the best way because they were the enemies of Egypt, and yet they had ultimately settled here along the coast where they had 5 cities of the plain, and they're going to be a thorn in the side now to the Israelites. So chapter 13 verse 2, our story opens then. There was a certain man of Zorah, who of the family of the Danites, that's the tribe of Dan, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had borne no children. Verse 3, then the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman, and said to her, behold, now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and give birth to a son. Her who was barren, she who could have no children, is now going to have a child, a son. Verse 4, now therefore be careful not to drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. Now that's probably good advice for anyone, but this is going to be the vow of a Nazirite, not just for a limited amount of time, but beginning with his conception all the way throughout his life. Verse 5, for behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the boy shall be a Nazirite to God, that is a separated one to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel from the hands of the Philistines. So God is planning for this child to grow up and to be the promised deliverer. Verse 24, we get to the end of the chapter, and the woman gave birth to a son and named him Samson. It's an interesting name. Sounds a little like Shemesh, the word for son. Not son like a son and daughter, but the son up in the sky. And the child grew up, and the Lord blessed him. Now, as our story moves into high gear with the child growing up, we're zooming in on that southern area of Canaan. In particular, notice as we come in, we can see what's called the Shephelah. These are the foothills. On the right-hand side of the map, we have the mountains of Judah. On the left-hand side of the map, we have the area of Philistia. And in the middle, at Beth Shemesh, remember Shemesh is the word for son, house of the sun. Sounds a little like Samson. It sounds like a little bit like his name. In this valley, the Sorek Valley, is going to be the scene of our story. Chapter 14, verse 1, then Samson went down to Timnah. And he's literally, when you say down, it doesn't mean he's going south. It means he's going downhill. And saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines, and that's going to spark off a whole series of events. Verse 2, so he came back and told his father and mother, I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore, get her for me as a wife. And then his father and his mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of your relatives or among our people that you go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? Why do you want a wife from those people? But Samson said to his father, get her for me. And here's his motivation, for she looks good to me. That's right out of the Hebrew. She looks good to me. Samson doesn't care about spiritual realities. He doesn't care about character. He wants the girl for her looks. She looks good to him. Somebody said the reason a lot of girls would rather have beauty than brains is because most guys can see better than they can think. Well, I don't know about that, but I do know that's Samson's story. Verse 4, however, his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, for he, that is God, was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. Now, at that time, the Philistines were ruling over Israel. So God's going to use this chain of events. It's not that Samson's doing it for God's reasons. Samson's doing it for his own motivation, but God is using those motivations to bring about God's plan. And so we're going to have a whole series of escalating conflicts. It begins with a wedding where Samson and this Philistine girl are now going to be married. And Samson proposes a riddle to the wedding guests. And whoever wins this guessing game that Samson proposes is going to pay a great deal of money, supply the loser of the game with a full suit of clothes, and you times however many people there are. There's quite a few people at the wedding. And the Philistines threaten his bride in order to get the answer, and she gets the answer from Samson and gives it to the Philistines, and so she has betrayed him. Samson goes out in order to pay off the bribe, in order to pay off the bet. He goes and indiscriminately kills a number of the Philistines, not the ones at the wedding party, but some others. We could call them the innocent bystanders, to pay off this gambling debt. And he does so, and that's not engendering any love between Samson and the Philistines. Well, Samson comes back now to get his bride, but while he has been gone taking care of business, his new father-in-law has given his bride to his best man, to another man, thinking, well, she betrayed him, so obviously he doesn't want her. And Samson hasn't thought that through. The father-in-law hasn't thought them through. But Samson's now out of a wife. The Philistines respond by, well, actually, Samson, first of all, burns the farmlands of the Philistines. And he captures a bunch of foxes, and he lets them out among, sort of ties things to their tails. It's not very kind to animals, but it's not kind to Philistines either. And spreads this fire through their territories and burns the farmlands of the Philistines. And in retaliation for that, his former bride, who's now been given to another, she is murdered. And Samson responds to the murder, even though it's not his bride anymore. He responds by going out and taking vengeance again upon the Philistines. It's escalating. And now he is captured, not by the Philistines. His own people are threatened with violence, and so they take him into custody, and they hand him over to the Philistines, and he's being carried back down to one of the cities of the Philistines to be judged and put to death. And the Spirit of God comes upon him, and he, in strength, breaks the bonds that are holding him, and he grabs a nearby jawbone of a donkey, and he goes and he kills 1,000 of the Philistines. It's escalating. We started off with just the wedding incident, and then burning of the farms, and then vengeance upon 30 of the Philistines, and then more, and now 1,000, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And Samson goes down to visit, again, it's a girl, a different girl this time, to visit a prostitute down at Gaza, one of those 5 Philistine cities, and they shut the gates. They think, oh, we've captured him. And he walks up and he pulls on the gates, and he pulls them down and carries them away. And he doesn't carry them like just across the street. He carries them up into the mountains, carries away the gates of Gaza. And now he's got a third girlfriend, new girlfriend, Delilah. Now she's not a prostitute, but evidently she's influenced by the Philistines who pay her off. And she gains the secret of his strength, which is his obedience to the Nazirite vow. In other words, that his head would not be shaved, his hair would not be cut. And she gives him, while he's asleep, she gives him a haircut. And the strength, now sometimes we get the idea that Samson is this big, giant, burly guy, with muscles just sticking out all over. We don't read that that's the case. That's not the secret of his strength. His strength isn't in his muscles. His strength was from the Lord. Could it be that Samson looked just like anybody else, but that God had given him this great strength? Well, he is shaven by Delilah, and now the Philistines capture him, and they put out his eyes. Chapter 16, verse 23. Several years have now passed, and he has been captured, blinded, and forced to work in the most menial of areas. And chapter 16, verse 23, the story comes to a conclusion. Now the lords of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god. That seems to be some people. The word Dagon actually sounds like the Hebrew word for fish, and so people thought, well, maybe it was a fish god. But now we've come to the conclusion upon further archaeological analysis, this was really a god of the grain. But Dagon, their god, and they said, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hands. So they're viewing this as an issue of my God's bigger than your God. And in verse 25, it so happened when they were in high spirits that they said, call for Samson that he may amuse us. So they called for Samson from the prison, and he entertained them. Not sure exactly what that looked like. They were evidently mocking him, making fun of him and his God, and they made him stand between the pillars. Now, it's interesting that we have uncovered, and I'm not saying this is the exact same place, but maybe similar architecture. We've uncovered one of the temples of the Philistines, and it was all centered around two big pillars. Now, that's just the ruins that you're looking at here, but two pillars that sort of were the central aspect of the temple, and imagine now Samson standing between the pillars. Verse 28, and Samson called to the Lord and said, O Lord God, please remember me and please strengthen me just this time, O God, that I may at once be avenged of the Philistines for my two eyes. And so, verse 29, Samson grasped the two middle pillars on which the house rested and braced himself against them, the one with his right hand, the other with his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bent with all his might, so that the house fell on the lords and all the people who were in it, so that the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those, even though we saw escalations, were more than those that he killed in his life. Now, it's interesting in telling the story of Samson that we're reminded of another story. You see, we read of an impossible birth, one who's in the case of Samson, it was the birth from a barren mother. In the case of Jesus, it was a virgin birth. He was set apart from birth as a deliverer of his people. He was betrayed by, in the case of Jesus, it was by one of his disciples, a beloved one. He did his greatest work in his death, as in death, rather than it being a defeat, was a great victory over the enemy. And I'm speaking not just of Samson, but of course I'm speaking of Jesus. But one story is about revenge, and yet the story of Jesus is about forgiveness. And that is the story into which we have entered. Not where God has taken vengeance upon us, but where we have found forgiveness at the cross.